Zdravo, guys. What's up and welcome to Macedonia, this really beautiful Balkan nation. I'm here in the capital, Skopje, in the northern part of the country on the Vardar River. I've been here for just about 2 weeks, and you already know it's time for the What's Going On in Macedonia episode. Let's find out why this magical place has such a magical history and such a controversial present. Let's do it. Before we get into this video, I will say that Macedonia is one of the most complicated countries in the Balkans by far, and that there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of xenophobia and racism when it comes to the topic of Macedonia. So I want to present this that I'm not an expert, I am not a nationalist, I'm not a person that leans any way for any Balkan country over the other. I just want to present the information the best that I can and welcome people to a country that many people don't get to hear from and don't get a chance to kind of hear about. So we're gonna go in, but you know the rules, so don't hate me in the comments. We start our story of Macedonia in the city center of this bustling capital, Skopje. Skopje right now is about 500,000 people, metro area somewhere around 600 to 800,000 people. It's a pretty big city. It's growing rapidly, and there's a big trend for a lot of people from the outskirts of Skopje and around Macedonia to come to Skopje for work, for opportunities, for university. You can find in a lot of the cities around Macedonia just old people and children, and they're missing this generation that are all now in Skopje trying to make a better life for themselves. To even begin to understand Macedonia in 2021, we need to look back at the history. This country is riddled with controversy, being one of the most notoriously spoken about countries in Europe, where even the name Macedonia brings a sense of controversy, where they actually had to change their name just a couple years ago to North Macedonia, which none of the people here identify with. It's a very strange story. We've got to talk about the history to get a sense of what's going on here. First and foremost, Macedonia is a country located to the east of Albania, to the west of Bulgaria, to the north of Greece, and to the south of Kosovo and Serbia. They have just about 2.5 million people. They are ethnic majority Macedonian with a large ethnic minority of Albanians and a smaller ethnic minority of Roma or Gypsy people. The rest of the Macedonian land is occupied by various Southern Balkans, Greeks, and then, you know, the occasional foreigners, as well as the Turks who were here for 500 years. To start our story, we have in front of us the Vardar River. This river is where the Paeonians, the kind of a Greek type of people, established a settlement called Skopje, which would later become this beautiful city of Skopje. Skopje was occupied by the Paeonians. They even have a kind of, they call it a kale, which is a fortress behind this building here, and the Paeonians were here for a couple thousand years, this city being occupied since 4000 BC. To the west were the Illyrians, and if you're curious about that, you can look in a card here where I talk about it in the context of Albania. A quick, super condensed history. The Paeonians, 4,000 years ago, settled this land. They then got absorbed into the Roman Empire, becoming part of the Eastern Roman Empire. Many of the people living here converted to Orthodox Christianity, became Byzantine. After that, the Bulgarian Empire kind of rose up out of the ashes of the Roman Empire, took over this land for the kind of South Slavic people. The Ottomans came in, Ottomanized the whole area in the early 1400s, 500 years of Ottoman rule. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, you get the kind of absorption of Macedonia into the Yugoslavia kind of camp. It was that country that was built of Serbia, Kosovo, Slovenia, Croatia, kind of the southern Slavs, right? It was kind of a socialist communist state. And then that thing fell apart in the early 90s, in which we get Macedonia declaring its independence. We get 30 years of independence, and now we get Northern Macedonia, you know, for the last like 3 years. This country, if you go on Wikipedia, has been on in 18 to 20 different empires, kingdoms, divisions. It's really, really confusing. So if you're curious, there's a lot of information on this region, but that's kind of that's the starting point. We're gonna start there. So here you go, guys, bird's eye view of Skopje. It's a pretty massive city of about 500,000 people. You've got these massive mountains in the background. The whole thing's really in a valley, and you have the Vardar River, which cuts right through it. The earthquake of 1963 made a massive impact on modern-day Skopje. The city beforehand was quite integrated between the Albanians, the Roma, and the Macedonians who were currently living here. But after that 1963 earthquake, basically the entire city was just destroyed. So in today's Skopje, you have the northern and the eastern parts of the city occupied by the kind of more traditional houses of the Albanians and the Roma, and everything south of the Vardar River here, where you can see these more large complexes, occupied by the Macedonians. The city got very, very split up very, very quickly, and it's probably one of the more segregated cities that you'll find in the Balkans. So question number one that's really important to ask and to answer is, who are the Macedonians today? Who are these people? So they are not the Paeonians who occupied this land in 4000 BC. They're not the descendants of the Greeks, but they are the descendants of Slavs. Slavs are people who basically occupy pretty much most of Eastern Europe, minus Romania and Albania. And these are people who speak a Slavic language, like Russian, Polish, Czech, and Macedonian. And these are people who have been living here for, 1,000, 1,500 years. The Southern Slavs, they go back a long, long period of time. Now, where it gets a little bit tricky is what I was reading is that the Macedonians as an ethnic group, as like a diverse, different ethnic group than the Bulgarians, is a little bit harder to trace, like what the actual differences are. Now, people who live in land for long periods of time typically develop different ethno-linguistic sort of backgrounds. So the Macedonian language today is very similar to Bulgarian. It's like it could be seen as a dialect, but it's actually a different language in sum total. It's very similar to Portuguese and Spanish today, where a lot of, for example, Macedonians can understand Bulgarian, but not a lot of Bulgarians can understand Macedonian. So there is a difference. There's certainly a difference. The kind of origin story of the Macedonian state that we're in right now kind of goes to this nationalism movement that came out of the Ottoman occupation in the 1850s. There was a small group of academics that saw the Macedonian identity as paramount to nationalism. You have to remember that these were people who were living under the Ottoman rule, under a Muslim rule for 500 years, and that as kind of the Ottoman Empire was starting to crumble towards the late 1800s, a lot of these peoples saw that nationalism was their way out to creating their own state for their own people. So kind of hence the Macedonian identity was born. Macedonians, or the Slavs living in this region, were for a long time under the Bulgarian Empire, especially before the Ottomans, and they were always called Bulgarians. In the sense that they are not actually Bulgarian, like national, like what the nation is today, but Bulgarians meaning the group of Southern Slavs that lived in this region. It would be the same thing as calling these people Byzantines under the time when they were in the Byzantine Empire, but they weren't Roman, and they weren't, not all of them were Christian. So we're not calling them Bulgarians. That is not what I'm saying. I'm trying to be really careful with my words here, because these people are not Bulgarians. They don't share a lot of the same similar modern day history as the Bulgarians, as Bulgaria was not part of Yugoslavia. Macedonians, however, created this kind of ethno-state as they integrated into Yugoslavia, first the Slavic kingdoms, and then into the socialist state itself in the right after World War II. Controversy alert. Don't take my opinion, read a lot of stuff, but here we go. Modern Macedonia as it is today is riddled with controversy because of a project called the Skopje 2014 project that happened here in Skopje by the former government. The government spent upwards of, some predict, 700 million euros on statues, what we would call the antiquitization of Skopje, where they took basically a city, which a lot of it, of course, was demolished in the earthquake, and they kind of replaced it with a whole bunch of stuff that questionably has to do with Macedonia. They spent that money on bridges. They spent that money on this kind of interesting stylistic choice of buildings here, this kind of antique. All these are new. Here, the old museum. The only thing that really is old from this even part of the city is this stone bridge, which is from the Ottoman times. The controversy really ensued when the government decided to budget a ton of money, like a ridiculous amount of money, for like thousands of statues to be put in and around Skopje. Most importantly, this one, which is Alexander the Great on a horse, and this one, which I believe is Philip II of Macedon. The reason these statues are so controversial is a twofold thing. Number one is that the government spent a ridiculous amount of money on these statues. Some people estimate that they could have saved 8 to 10 times what they spent on these statues, and many people know that this statue, for example, could have been built for, I don't know, €1 million, and they ended up spending 5 million euros, which basically means that the extra 4 million euros discretionarily got stuffed into people's pockets. The Balkan region is extremely challenging because of the corruption that you find here amongst the politicians. Everybody knows this. Everybody is an accomplice to this at some point, and it's just a realization here in the Balkans, unfortunately, that the governments are highly corrupt. So that's the number one controversy. The number two controversy, as I pointed out with those other two big statues, is that we discussed that the Macedonians were Slavs, or are Slavs. They come from the Slavic peoples that migrated south from the Russian areas. So, people are very confused about why Slavic people would put Alexander the Great, who was Hellenic, or kind of a precursor to the modern day Greeks, and then Philip of Macedon, who was a Macedonian, but the Macedonians in the past were also Greek-speaking people. They have no identity connection with modern day Macedonians. So there's this kind of really big confusion on why the government decided to do this, and many people in the Balkans, they also have the king, one of the kings of the Bulgarian Empire. It's like a huge spit in the face to Bulgaria, a huge spit in the face to Greece, and it added a lot of drama that didn't necessarily need to happen. Do the Macedonians, are they able to claim this? I don't know. I'm not the guy to ask. I respect all Balkan countries. I think the history is super interesting. Is it a little bit weird that they would put kind of figures from Greek and Bulgarian past into, in their city center and kind of claim them as their own heritage? I think it's a little weird, but I'm not the one to say. You guys can discuss it in the comments. Please keep it civil. But it's a really controversial place, and people have a lot of feelings about Macedonia, we'll tell you. Walking around modern day Skopje is incredibly strange. So here you can see, they've got, easily 100 statues all on this thing. You got to imagine, 500,000 euros, 500,000 euros, 500,000 euros, 500,000 euros, like 50 million euros for this building, that building, that building, that building. It really actually feels like Caesar's Palace. Because the thing is, these aren't new. These buildings are 6 years old, and they're supposed to kind of allude to the past, but then again, they're Slavs, and this is Greek style. The whole thing's very strange. So I kind of understand what they're doing. For tourists, for people who don't know the history, it seems nice. You got nice statues, you got like nice Greek columns. But the thing is, for Macedonians who average 300 to 400 euros a month on a good day, where people are living on pensions of 60 euros a month when they hit over 60 years old, all you can see is corruption, 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 corruption. And so I can totally see how 100 statues on this bridge, 100 statues on that bridge, this ridiculous architecture, this building, they actually call it, they actually have a name for it. It's called Macedonian kitsch, which means this kind of, mishmash of history, art, culture, all of it. It must be really frustrating when you're, living in one of the most corrupt countries in the Balkans, and they're spending all of your tax money on things that don't benefit you as people, and you're living in one of the poorest countries in Europe. I can only imagine how frustrated I would be at my government for doing something like this. And the fact that the statues are still up, and to be fair, they were built kind of poorly, it's like a poke in the eye. I feel sorry for the Macedonians. It sucks. Just as we make our way into the old town now, I found an amazing place to illustrate how confusing and kitsch Skopje is. So the Ottomans were here, as I said. So this is an old Ottoman hammam, a bathhouse. You've got the Slavic Cyrillic word charshia. You've got the kind of old Paeonian castle here in the background, a kale, a fortress. You have a Orthodox Catholic or Orthodox Christian church, and you have this statue of Philip II of Macedon, who was Greek. So what is the identity of modern day Macedonia? If anyone wants to tell me, leave a comment. Just like with Tirana, you really can't talk about modern day Skopje without discussing the presence of the Ottoman Empire and what that did to the people, the language, the place, the region as a whole. So now we're walking into the old bazaar. So this is actually much more Turkic than anything you would typically find in Albania. And you also have to remember that Macedonia is 25% Albanian ethnically. So there's a lot of Muslims who live here too, and there's also some Turks that kind of got left over from the occupation here. So here you even see they sell çiğ köfte, which is a very Turkish thing, and the style here, this is pretty much the only part of the old city that didn't get destroyed during the earthquake. And you can see overall it looks much more like something you would find in Izmir or in Istanbul or in Ankara, and much less like what you would find in Greece, for example. Walking through the old town, I stumbled upon a han. They're calling it Süleymaniye Han. And a han is what we saw in Turkey. It's these old trading posts that you find all over the old Ottoman Empire. And so they're, these squares. I'm gonna link to my Diyarbakir video so you can see one of the really famous ones in Turkish Kurdistan. And you often just don't find them with old Yugoslav rockets on the inside. That's pretty cool. I find there is a lot more Ottoman life here, this Ottomanization, this Turkic kind of thing than you can find in other Balkan countries that I've been to. It seems to be a big part of their kind of heritage for their old town, which makes it even more confusing, to be honest. But that being said, is it cheap? Yeah, Macedonia is pretty cheap. It's kind of goes along with the Balkans. Albania is a little bit cheaper, but kind of the same prices you're gonna find in Bulgaria or in Serbia for sure. You normally get lunch for like 3, 4, 5 euros, something like that. You can get this big thing called a pjeskavica, which is like a sandwich with fries from a place like this called Tetek. Costs like 2 euros. It's absolutely ridiculous. Insane. I ate here the other day. Super, super delicious. So that's good. And of course, important, is it safe? It is pretty safe. Again, the Balkans, everybody here is super friendly, super nice, really helpful, wants to hang out, and the English in this country is amazing. Macedonians speak amazing English, unbelievable. What you typically wouldn't find in Albania, for example, is a big Macedonia flag, but here you can see, because there are so many Albanians that live here, you can still buy Albanian things. The weirdest thing that I find about Skopje is that it is very, very ethnically segregated. The second that you cross this old town, it goes from being in Macedonia to feeling like you're back in Albania, or even in a place that's a little bit more Islamic or influenced than that. You see a lot more hijabs. You see most people are speaking Albanian or Turkish. It's like a completely different city. Super, super unique. So here we actually have this kind of open air bazaar, Albanian flags. We have more people wearing hijabs. And if you go down, here's the older part of the city where you find more of the Albanian community of Macedonia. This is where Skopje back here turns into Skopje over there. I legitimately feel like I'm in a different city. I walked 1 kilometer and I feel like I'm in downtown Istanbul. It's really, really weird. I like it though. I really do like it. Controversy alert. The last controversy, and I almost forgot to talk about it, is the name. So the official name of the country is the Republic of Northern Macedonia. This is pretty new. This happened just a few years ago because there's basically a huge issue between the Greeks and the Macedonians over the name of Macedonia. Many people wanted the Macedonians to change their name because there's a region called Macedonia in Greece. What's up, guys? Speaking about the nice Macedonian Albanians, I met some guys. They offered me an espresso. The friends, there they are. Got to put the mask on, got to be safe. And we're at Luto.com. If you're in downtown Skopje and you need shoes, liver is shoes. Yes. If you need liver, which is a really bad translation because liver is something else in English, this is the place you got to come. Gazur. I was talking about the controversial name of Macedonia, but some Albanian boys wanted to drink a coffee with me, so that's what you got to do. So the name North Macedonia, why is it complicated? What's going on? So the Macedonians and the Greeks have a huge disagreement over what Macedonia is and who has the claim to the name itself. The Macedonians here say, of course, we're Macedonian. It's our name, it's our country, this is the land. But Macedonia also exists in Greece. The bordering province in Greece is also called Macedonia. So the Greeks and the Macedonians were arguing. They settled on the North Macedonia name. They changed the name just a couple years back. None of the Macedonians consider themselves North Macedonians, and the Greeks kind of see it as a cop-out. They wanted something that was totally different than Macedonian. So super confusing, super controversial, big problem. What's so controversial about all of this is that everybody's offended about everything here. You call it one thing the Albanian way, you're out. You call it the Macedonian way, you're out. You call it North Macedonia, you're out. You call it Macedonia, you've pissed the Greeks off. Everyone's unhappy about Macedonia. So it's kind of like beautifully complicated. It is what it is. People will be people. Nationalism happens, and that is just a big old reality of living here in the Balkans. The last interesting thing to note about the ethnic division is that there's actually the largest self-governing gypsy community anywhere in the world here in the northern part of Skopje. I would love to check it out. I might do a video, I might make it possible, so stay tuned for that. If not, the gypsy community, I don't want to go too into it, but they're a nomadic community that comes from northern India. They're all over the Balkans, all over Eastern and pretty much Western Europe. They're everywhere. They go around. But there's a lot of sketchy situations, and they kind of, after the earthquake, they got sent out. Basically, they got kind of kicked out of the city, and they live in kind of like this, you know, this area. It's not a slum, but there are some slum houses that are not connected to the electricity or water grids. Kind of illegal, but it is something to know. And gypsy people are nice generally, so you know, I would definitely love to see more of that information as well. So guys, with an ancient mosque in the back and an even more ancient fortress in front of me, that's going to be it for Macedonia. If you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, it helps me out. Again, I'm not an expert on Balkan politics. This is just stuff I found online plus talking from friends. If you want to argue about, you know, who invented the mosque and who invented meatballs, feel free to do so in the comments, but I'm not holding any national opinion here. I just love this country, I love this region, and I'm very happy to share it with the world. So thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, we've got some good stuff coming up. Stay tuned for a food episode coming next, and we will see you on the flip side. From Macedonia. Bye bye.